You need rich parents to own housing in Canada, not just GTA, Canada. Yeah, it is a true statement because Statcan, actually the government of Canada published that if you have rich parents that own property, you're more likely to own property. Yeah, crazy, right? So we're gonna go through that report, some of the data that in the past little bit for pricing, and I'm gonna tell you some anecdotal stories of why I always thought this was true, and it's just now more concrete and solidified in our current market. Now, if you are a first-time homeowner and you don't have rich parents, and again, I wish I had rich parents too, but it's part of the struggle, it's fine. But there are some opportunities which may go against the grain right now, where I have been saying in the past week that the listings that are available in December of this year in 2023, if they're still around, it could very much be an opportunity for you to get in the market right now. I'm not saying prices are going to go up, but anyone who's in the market right now that's selling is probably likely needing to sell, which means that they'll probably take a lower bid, right? So if you are trying to be that rich parent for your future kids, you can book a call with me. Use the link that's right here. It's www.chatwithzen.com. Simply click on a date and a time that works best for you. And then when you see the prompt, fill in your name, email, mobile phone number, and the question you have for me, and then we'll chat then. Good day, Toronto. Welcome to another episode of Prime Properties TV. My name is Zhen, and I run and operate at Remax in the Greater Toronto Area, on top of making awesome educational real estate content just like this one. And it's a very unfortunate topic I have to make today, but yeah, if you do like this idea of me talking more controversial stuff, do me a solid and like and subscribe to the Prime Properties channel so that we can help get the knowledge out there. So Statcan essentially came out with this article over here that says, parents and children in the Canadian housing market. Does parental property ownership increase the likelihood of home ownership for the adult children? Yeah, the obvious answer is yes. But I mean, we all knew that, but it's just how much of a difference it makes. They put it into numbers, which, I love, right? So we're going to go through that. So here's some key findings, right? And they kind of called an adult children, which I think is an inappropriate term, but essentially anyone who was born after the 90s, right? So if you're born in the 90s, you would be 33 right now. Oh, Jesus. Just had I'm old moment. So if you're born in the 90s, if your parents are homeowners, you're very likely to be a homeowner in 2021, right? They also said that if the parents own multiple properties, they're 3 times as likely to be homeowners than non-homeowners, like parents that are that. And then also talks about how people who were born in the 90s, so people 33 and under who own multiple properties, most definitely had parents with multiple properties, right? So that's pretty given. Now, the one thing that I did kind of highlight here is that the positive effect associated with parental property ownership is highest for children with individual incomes below $80,000. So I'm gonna go through some stress test numbers on what $80,000 can get you right now. But this is an important thing that I wanted to highlight, because if you can't qualify for a mortgage or property for something in the current market value right now, you have basically your parents sending money your way to buy that property. And I think that's what the key finding I find in this report is, right? So here's a snippet. I kind of just want to illustrate the numbers on how rampant this is, right? This is from Benjamin Tao saying that there's a growing reliance on parental support in Canada, especially in large housing markets such as ours in Toronto. Basically saying that from 2015 to 2021, that the gifted people who got a gift went from 20 to 28%. So now we're almost at a third of first-time homers having help from their parents. That's a lot, right? Now, it's still not the majority of first-time homeowners, but they are in some way, shape, or form having help. It may not show up as they're gifting money, but it may show up in helping them qualify and being on title. And I personally see that with some of our clients and some anecdotal things I hear from our office as well, right? And this is very obvious, but we'll just spell out here. The existing literature on intergenerational wealth transfers and home ownership shows a positive relationship between parental wealth and the children's home owning outcomes, reproducing wealth inequality across generations. It's unfortunately what has kind of happened in the West. And if you really think about it as a parent, if you have the means to help your kids buy a place near you so that they don't have to say move to Nova Scotia or Calgary, and no shade thrown against those provinces, you obviously will do everything in your power to keep them here, right? And here's a very quick anecdotal story for you. In our culture, so the Chinese culture, it's very, very common for the kids to live with their parents basically up until they get married. Super common. And when they move out, if they can qualify for themselves, they'll go buy it themselves. But if not, the parents take some money and they transfer it over to them in the form of borrowing from the house that has gone up tons of money, right? Or they have made some money, paid down their debts, and they're just gifting it, right? And all that goes to contribute so that their kids can buy a home near them. And, it keeps going over and over and over again. This is a cultural thing. I see it over and over and over again in the Chinese culture. So if you're buying anything in like the Richmond Hill, Markham area, like York region, 100% happens all the time. And on top of that, some of the kind of call it Gen Xers and boomers are getting ahead of that for their kids, and they're actually buying places for investment in like Toronto downtown for in case their kid goes to like Ryerson or whatever it is called now, or like U of T, right? So they're kind of front running it, and that's why there's a lot of pre-construction buyers in that space, and they're essentially buying these condos for their kids to go to school there because residence is pretty expensive downtown for like if you get it from the universities, right? So this is very normal. I've known about it. It's culturally ingrained in my culture. So this is not new, but it may be new for some people. And the crazy thing is like, I think a lot of people have been talking about this. Like I think a few years ago, there was even this bulletin board that says, can't afford a home? Have you tried choosing richer parents? And I think that's just kind of like a joke because you can't really choose your parents, right? But at the same time, if you have parents that have some means, yeah, you're very much likely to get ahead, right? It's the same idea as like private school versus public school, right? Same thing. So we're going to get into some of the numbers that kind of came out. So this chart basically shows you here that the likelihood of you owning a home based on obviously when you were born. So if you're in 1990s, that puts you at 33, right? Which, like that's kind of when you're starting a family, maybe depending on like when you got married, right? And obviously when you get to 1990, you're like 24, right? Yeah, 24. And you owning a home is very unlikely, right? I would say most people who are buying as a first-time owner, whether they have parental help or not, like they're somewhere around like mid to late 20s. So that puts you in this cohort. But you can see this cohort, it's not that very big, right? It's like 1 in 5 of them. But you can see essentially over here that, if you're 30s, like there's a 1/3 of a chance that you're likely, to buy a home, assuming your parents have a home, right? And then we kind of go into the breakdown over here. It breaks down by province. And you can see Ontario's kind of like in the middle, right? You're most likely to own a place in New Brunswick, Manitoba, PEI, and then this is the Atlantic provinces, right? So including Nova Scotia. And BC is like down here because they're also just as expensive. But Ontario is not bad. But just keep in mind, like there are different parts of Ontario that are a lot less expensive. So you go like really far north, like Sudbury and north, or even if you go like really far east, you can get some stuff around Belleville that's much more reasonable. It's just like the GTA area, and then you expand to like the western side by like London and Windsor, where it's been very popular for investment, that prices have climbed quite a bit, right? Now in this chart, it basically says that how many properties the parents own is more likely that their, call it, kids are gonna be a homeowner. So you can see essentially here, if the parents own 3 or more properties, it's essentially a 30% increased chance of that their kids are gonna own homes. And, I'm going to try to mix anecdotal story and kind of like some of the maybe immigrant kind of mindset into this is if you come here to basically call it the white picket fence kind of dream, call it the Canadian dream or whatever, right? If you are able to earn, kind of like achieve that, you're going to want to pass it on to your kids, right? So it's very normal that if the parents are homeowners, they're going to teach kind of the mindset of being homeowners to the next generation, right? And that's very, very normal in my culture. And I think it's very normal in most people's culture as well. And even though there's debates about like rent versus buying, and yes, right now, statistically, in some cases, depending on what your rent situation is, renting makes more sense. The idea between that is not that you can always win the arbitrage between the two, is that call it in 25 or 30 years when you pay off your home, right? When the mortgage is over, you have a home that you don't pay anything for into your retirement. Because if you're in your retirement and you're still renting, you don't have that kind of like security of roof over your head, and maybe CPP because of inflation cannot cover your rent, right? So that's kind of the idea of owning a home, right? Like if you're 65 and you don't have any other expenses, I don't like call it taxes or maybe maintenance fee, you're a lot better off than someone who's still renting, right? Now, when I go into this chart, it talks about basically the tail end of the millennials. I think millennial ends somewhere around like 94 or so. So like people who are between like 29 and 31 years old, right? So you can see that basically same kind of trend. If your parents own more properties, the more likely you're to own. At to the point right now where if your parents own 3 or more properties, as a 29, 30, and 31-year-old, there's a 42% chance that you're going to own your home, which makes absolute sense because you're in your prime earning years to an extent, right? You may earn more obviously later in your career, but when you're 29 to 30, your income generally is pretty good and you can afford to kind of go on title and buy something. You may have collected some down payment, or essentially your parents have gifted you that much, right? So this is a very obvious thing, but you can see that in the older cohort who needs the home to call their own, maybe because they're starting a family, it's very obvious that it makes a big difference, right? Obviously, but they're spelling this data out. Now, the key thing in all of this, and I'm going to pull this in because just because you have rich parents, essentially, Doesn't mean you can buy a loan because you still need the income to qualify. And I think that's kind of the metric I want to compare between the two. And with this one, it says the average income of non-owners was essentially $36,000, and compared to a homeowner is $65,000. So there's almost a double percent spread, which essentially means that maybe the homeowners have made more, like the adult homeowners have made more money, and they've pushed their kids into a better career, so that made more money, which allows them to qualify for a mortgage, versus those who are not homeowners, make about half the income. Maybe their careers aren't as developed, they're making as much money, and maybe they aren't able to get into the housing market for that reason as well, right? So I'm going to show you kind of what some of the numbers look like from a stress test perspective to show you how important this is. But before I do that, to illustrate why this is important and why the adults are able to pass on so much wealth is this. Let's say the adults passing on like generational wealth right now are, call it like Gen Xers and some boomers, right? So they're like 40s to 50s, right? So they maybe had their kids in like late 20s and 30s. So they would have probably bought some homes around the early 2000s in their 30s, right? So at that time, a home was about like 400,000 or so. Now we're going up to here, 300,000 or so. Now we're going up to here, which is like 1.1. So the properties that they own, if they held for that long, have essentially 4x'd in value. So even if whatever, like the interest rates are super high and like the boomers are saying, oh, I got interest rates in 18%, the value of that home, obviously inflation not adjusted, has 4x'd, or it's gotten 4.5% per year, which on a leverage perspective, times 5, right? Because if you did 20% down, again, things are different back in the day, but just assuming that in current landscape, that's like 25% return on your money each and every year. So do these parents have ability to pass on money to their kids? 100%, as long as like, you know, they didn't use their house as an ATM, right? So this is why they're doing it, right? You can see the average home has gone up $946,000. So even if you have to pass on a few $100,000 to your kids so that it can stay near you and not move out of province or move out of country, are you going to do it? Probably, right? And then when you kind of look at the stress test numbers, right? So if you want to buy a $500,000 property right now, which essentially is kind of like a 1-bedroom condo, maybe a studio if you're downtown, right? If you start out with a $60,000 income, call it, you know, you're 25, 26, that's your starting income, maybe you got a tiny bump, right? In like a professional career, right? What you can qualify for is not much. You essentially can't even get the mortgage for this. You can see right here it says stop, your ratios are all over. You're way over. You're supposed to be at like 30 something percent. Over here, you're at 55. So with $60,000, it doesn't work, right? Because the rates are at 6.25 right now, right? So are your parents going to fill the gap, or they go on title? That's kind of where the intergenerational kind of transfer is happening right now. And they're transferring now before they kind of pass away with inheritance. So that's why if you have rich parents, you're very likely to get ahead in life right now, because your rich parents, the boomers, are passing on the most amount of wealth that has ever been accumulated in history by that cohort, like that demographic, to the kids right now, right? So if you have rich parents, are you way better off? 100%, right? Now, if you kind of look at this one, this is a green light. So how much income do you actually need to buy that 500,000 at these current rates, right? 6.24 with the, you know, plus 2% stress test. You need $105,000 income just to buy this with no other debts, right? So if you're starting off 60,000, can your parents go on title to help you? Yes. But can your parents maybe give you like $250,000 so that you can qualify for your maximum mortgage and still buy the $500,000 property? 100%. This is what I'm seeing a lot of, right? I'm seeing that gifted down payment, which the banks generally use. And what happens is the parents pay for, call it that gift from a refinance or a line of credit. And then that gift money as a down payment goes to the kids and they go buy that home. Right? So instead of like, you know, 80% mortgage, like 80 loan to value, a lot of these first time buyers have a 50% loan to value. They're really, really well off as opposed to those who don't have rich parents. That's exactly what I'm seeing. And again, this has quantify it, right? And just to give you some more perspective why interest rates make a big difference, this is what the rate was in the pandemic, right? So you'd be qualifying at the lower bound, which is 5.25, right? Because it's, if you do 2.5 plus 2, that's has to be at least 5.25, so the stress is at 5.25, which means that to buy that $500,000 property, you could have qualified at $75,000, right? So that's $30,000 less than what it is right now. So that's how much money you have to increase on your salary to get the same house from 2 years ago. You see why, just because prices may have gone down a little bit, affordability has not gotten you better, unless you had rich parents, right? Unless you have rich parents. So kind of going back to, the income component side, which is very interesting. You can essentially see in this chart over here that the adult children homeownership rates for children born between 1990 to 92, which is the one we've been talking about, if they have less than 40,000% income, there's still 1 in 4 chance that they own a home if their parents own 3 or more properties, because they can just gift and transfer that money over. They may not be getting a big mortgage, but they're getting a big down payment as a gift. And obviously, this amount keeps increasing and increasing if they make more and more money, because the parents give less and less money, right? So the incentives for that are even better for the parents gifting the money. And that's kind of why we always knew that if you had rich parents, the intergenerational wealth transfer has been there. And a lot of people, even before this was posted and even before the pandemic and all this additional housing affordability talks have kind of made things even worse, at least in our culture, it's very, very normal to get your kids started with real estate so that they can own something, because as an immigrant, you want to have roots that you can lay, because, when you come here, you don't have roots, you want to lay roots, and you're going to teach that to your kids. I find it's only a few generations that have passed through. Maybe they go through the cycle of, hey, do I want to rent or buy? Because they want the flexibility and not be tied down to the home area, right? But anyone who's, I say, first or second generation, I think most of the time the parents are helping, at least from what I can tell from my book of clients, right? And I talked about it before. It generally starts at, if you're really, really advanced, you get them started with the pre-con, and it gets passed on to them via trust or corporations. If they're in university, you buy a home for them to kind of just let them live in there as opposed to residency. And at some way, shape, or form, maybe if they get married, you gift them a down payment so that they buy a home and to raise a family. Those are the 3 most common areas that I see people come to me for investment to basically help get their kids started. And they always stem in some way, shape, or form with those 3. So now that we can quantify, are you a homeowner if you have rich parents? The answer is obviously yes. But seeing these numbers is kind of staggering, right? It clearly is a 40-50% chance increase of being a homeowner if you have rich parents. And I don't see this getting any better, because the price point has gotten so much higher that you essentially have to start off as a $100,000 earner, or maybe $150,000 earner right off the bat in salary, just to be able to buy your own property. And the $250,000 earner is essentially the top 1%. So it's very, very difficult for your average person, even when they get to their 30s and maybe they're crossing 6 figures and they saved up that down payment on their own, to be able to buy a home for themselves. It's very, very difficult. So maybe your real estate ladder starts a little bit shorter and you have to get into your first condo in your late 20s and your 30s, as opposed to a freehold home or a condo townhome, right? But it's compressed down harder and harder. And it's obvious that it is very hard for, call it the Gen Z, so anyone born after 95. And that's kind of why the parents have to step in. Is this going to get worse? 100%. Because those who keep having the assets inflate in price have the ability, being closer to the money printer and their assets going up, to be able to pass that down. And you have to keep increasing income at a very rapid rate for you to kind of buck that trend. That percentage in which you need to increase your income gets higher and higher, because you can see the gap between the average the average income, which is the orange line here, versus the price, keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the multiplier is at 22 times, which makes getting into the market that much harder unless you have rich parents. So it's not going to get any better. But if you are a parent and you want to get your kids get started, it's unfortunately kind of how you have to do it. So if you're a parent and you kind of want your kid to kind of stay around you in the future, yes, buying a property for them in advance does make a lot of sense, while the entry point is a lot easier right now relative to where it could be when they're an adult parent, according to the stat. And if you want to kind of learn more about how to do that, you can book a call with me using the link right here. It's www.chatwithzen.com. Until next time, your move, your future. See ya. Now that I'm done watching this video, I think you should check out this video. And you know what? Why don't you check out this video too?